The Absurd and Fantastical has added a couple of new articles. If you're interested, please follow the link below. I hope you all enjoy the video. Thank you to Azipur for requesting this video. I hope you enjoy. When we think of titans in modern-day culture, we conjure up images of gigantic monsters, frightening and terrifying in their design. They should be mindless, merciless, and gigantic, crazed for power, tyrannical and vicious, and of course always defeated by their younger, brighter children, the Olympians. Games, films, and books push the concept of the destructive monster, often placing great emphasis on the horrific Kronos who devoured his children, a sure sign of a primitive, ghastly creature. But do these images reflect the true titans in ancient Greece? Were they truly mindless, power-crazed monsters? Did their rise and eventual fall only serve as a grand stage to showcase how cunning and brave the newer generation would be? Or did the titans possibly represent something more? To answer these questions about the titans, we must first delve into their mythology, starting with their origin. So, in the beginning, there was chaos. Not the mindless bedlam of flying rocks, debris and spitting fires bursting from nothing, but rather more like a chasm, dark, yawning and endless in its very concept, and from it sprang the world. Gaia, the mother of all, separated first from the chasm, acting as the solid foundation for the rest of creation. Then came the shadowed misery of Tartarus, which settled deep beneath her when none could see or reach. Then came Eros, desire and lust. These three, chasm, Gaia, Eros, formed the primordial stuff from which everything else would grow. Gaia gave birth to towering mountains, the vast sea of Pontus, the one-eyed Cyclops master smiths, and the powerful 100-handers who were giants with 100 arms and 50 heads. And then the sky, Uranus, split from the earth as well. Uranus so lusted after Gaia that he often forced himself upon her. Back then the sky and the earth were inseparable, almost completely merged, giving Gaia no true quarter away from her brother. Through this union, the Titans were born. 5 brothers, Oceanus, Coeus, Crius, Hyperion, and Iapetus came first. Then the 6 daughters, Thea, Rhea, Themis, Mnemosyne, Phoebe, Thetis, and the last son, Kronos. The Titan's power burned bright and marvelous, but Uranus wanted no other to overthrow him. So one by one, he forced them back into Gaia, hiding them deep within her where none could reach. Exhausted beyond measure, Gaia whispered to her children, asking them for her help. The Titans hesitated, mostly Oceanus, who was uncomfortable with leading an assault against his father. He battled daily with his conscience, but it would eventually back down from the possible confrontation. In the end, it was the youngest Kronos and his 4 brothers, Hyperion, Coeus, Crios, and Iapetus, who decided to help their mother. Gaia gave Kronos a sickle made from adamantium, the strongest metal in the world. The 5 brothers lay in wait, and when Uranus covered Gaia once more, the 4 brothers grabbed their father by his arms and legs, pinning him down, while Kronos leapt from his hiding place and with one mighty slice castrated his father, spilling his essence all across the world. Uranus reeled back, screaming in agony, shaking the earth to its core, and finally splitting the earth and sky, giving the Titans the chance to break free. As the essence of sky spilled over the world, it created further creatures, one of which was the beautiful Aphrodite, who was born from the waves of the foaming sea where the essence fell. She was the most fair of all the Titans, striking and beautiful. She would live on beyond them into the pantheon of the Olympians. Kronos, the youngest, took up the throne of Olympus. He was the representative of both spectrums of time, good beginnings, the changing of seasons, and dire ends, the withering of bodies. Also of the harvest. He would often in art be depicted with a sickle in his hand, a symbol of prosperity. Now, also of violence. He would eventually replace his father as Sky. He may also be the father of Chiron, the wise centaur. Although mostly considered by Greeks as only a figure to be destroyed before Zeus could reign, the Romans held far more affection for the god. They merged him with Saturn, one of their oldest deities, also a god of the harvest and seasons, and celebrated his festival every year. The pacifist Oceanus, the eldest Titan, became the mighty river which encircled the entire world, even reaching the far point where sky and earth still touched. At first he represented the fresh water and springs, but would later shift to become the unknown oceans. depicted as half man and half fish, his lower half being fish. Cous, the second son's name, means intelligence, query, or question. One might even say thought personified. Although he plays a very small role, his grandchildren are Artemis and Apollo. Crius, the third son, has no unique role in the stories. His name could mean ram, which might associate him with the constellation of Aries and possibly spring. Some might call him the god of constellations, seeing as he is associated with the first constellation in the zodiac, Aries. Also, his other name, Polus, associated him with the North Pillar and the axis upon which the world turns, again associating him with the sky. Hyperion was the original god of the sun. Before Apollo, he would have been painted in bright colors and depicted as striking. His name means he who goes above, and with Thea would father Helios, also a sun symbol. Thea would also give birth to Selene, the moon, and Eos, the dawn. Iapetus was the fifth son. Once again quite obscure, his name could also mean to pierce or to spear. Although no clear reason is given, it could possibly suggest a connection to death, and some even call him the god of mortality. He was also, according to quite a few sources, the father of Prometheus, the young Titan who would later create humanity, another connection to mortality. Thea was the first daughter, and her name fittingly means divine or even sight. She represented the bright blue of the world, or ether. Her children, Eos, Hestios, and Selene, would all carry her brightness even further in the stories. She also imbued gold, silver, and gemstones with their shining, sparkling qualities, thus giving them their value. Rhea was the second daughter and the mother of many Olympian gods. Her name means ground or perhaps discharge, but it can be said that she would eventually replace her mother Gaia as a modern sort of Earth. She and Kronos would have 6 children, some of which you might know: Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, Poseidon, and Zeus, all of which had become parts of the main Olympian gods. Celebrated as the mother of gods, many worshipped her in that capacity and built temples and statues in her honor. Themis, the third daughter, became the personification of order and justice. Carrying a set of scales, many will recognize her in the courts of law, being depicted often blind. The sash around the eyes, however, was only later added. For the Greeks, she also became the voice of the oracle or of the earth, and guided the people in hospitality, governance, and of course laws. She can also be depicted with a sword, a means to cut the truth from the lies, to separate the good from the bad. When she was shunned, Nemesis would seek retribution. Mnemosyne was the goddess of memory. As a consort to Zeus, she gave birth to the 9 muses, who would inspire epics and poetry. All powers of speech and oral traditions came from Mnemosyne, and before any reciting of a poet would always incite the goddess first to be imbued with memory and speech. She also has a river in the underworld called Lethe, where the souls of the dead drink so that when they are reincarnated, they would not remember their old lives. Unlike the rest of the Titans, who were considered to be part of a bygone era, Mnemosyne was instead worshipped as part of the modern pantheon. As the mother of muses, she was the heart of inspiration and creativity, and many poets would begin their stories invoking her blessing. Phoebe meant a brilliant goddess, and could possibly be the light of the sky. Her grandchildren would become the Olympian god of the sun, Apollo, and goddess of the moon, Artemis. In Rome, she also identified with the moon goddess Diana. Thetis was the youngest daughter and wife to Oceanus. In the Iliad of Homer, she is mentioned as possibly being the primeval mother along with Oceanus as the primeval father. Some believe her to be a possible placeholder for Tiamat. This conclusion has been drawn by many a scholar. Then there was the 3 younger Titans. Atlas, angry but brilliant, would father a race of brilliant children that would settle on what would become Atlantis. Prometheus, forethought, and Epimetheus, afterthought. Kronos crafted the first people, which the poets called the Golden Race, often referred to as the Golden Age. The era was filled with happiness and peace and was often depicted in Renaissance art. There was no work, no war, no need for labor. As the god of the harvest, Kronos ensured his people were always sated, forgoing any need for conflict. When they died, it was never in pain, only as if they fell into a deep sleep. But despite the prosperity and joy, Kronos feared his own children, as much as Uranus had feared the Titans, and as Rhea gave birth to each child, he had to ensure it could not usurp him. Having learned from his own father, he forgoes forcing them back and instead swallows them whole. One by one they were gobbled up and swallowed down, and in the depths of his stomach the children grew bitter and angry at their father and their horrible fate. Desperate, Rhea went to her mother Gaia and begged her to help her save her children, as she had once saved her own from Uranus. Gaia told Rhea to exchange the next child with a swaddling stone and then secretly send the child away. This was done, and Rhea gave birth to Zeus in a small cave on Crete, where Kronos could not see. She quickly sent the child away, and wrapping the stone up in the bloody rags, she gave it to Kronos, who swallowed it without a thought. When Zeus grew older and was told what his father had done, he became enraged and vowed to stop him. Sneaking into his father's temple, he disguised himself and offered his father a glass of tonic made by Metis, the daughter of Oceanus. When Kronos drank it, he vomited up the swaddling stone, which Zeus would later place at Apollo's temple at Delphi. Then, one by one, he threw up the rest of his children. Immediately, the Titans and Olympians declared war, and thus the greatest and most violent war in the mythos, the epic Titanomachy, began. Now here we must pause for a moment to consider Atlas. In the stories it is said his children were taught well and were intelligent, creating the capital of splendor called Atlantis, and thus inspiring Zeus's jealousy. Another story instead claims they were dim-witted and annoying, raising his ire instead. In either story, though, Zeus despised them and so flooded Atlantis and destroyed the marvelous city. Enraged, Atlas joined sides with the Titans. With such a brilliant mind, and also considered the god of war, he was chosen as their commander, and through his intelligence and ferocity they fought the younger brilliant Titans on equal footing. Some other stories instead claim that Atlas only battled the Titans long after the Titanomachy, but the point of the tale is that Atlas dared raise his hand against Olympus and Zeus would punish him for it. The Titanomachy would be fought in Thessaly at the base of Mount Olympus and would last for 10 years. Zeus would free the Cyclops and the 100-handers from Tartarus to help them in the battle. The Cyclops in turn crafted 3 weapons for the battle: the trident of Poseidon, the helmet of Hades, and the thunderbolts of Zeus. With these weapons, they stood a chance against the Titans. Oceanus once again decided to stay out of the conflict. He hid away in his caverns and the safety of his ocean. He had no desire to be part of such a brutal war. The two opposing forces, old and young, clashed at the base of the mountain, shaking the very foundations of earth and making the sky tremble at its ferocity. Landscapes and mountains were rearranged by the sheer force of their clashing weapons, but no matter how hard they fought, the Olympians could not push back the Titans. Eventually, Mnemosyne told them their victory lay in the Cyclops and the 100-handers, so they gave the smiths and the 100-handers the nourishment of the gods, the nectar, and with renewed strength the Olympians launched a final assault, finally pushing back the Titans and sealing them in the depths of Tartarus. Down in the depths, the Titans were sealed away behind bronze bars crafted by Hephaestus and the mighty Cyclops. Coes, though, smart and intelligent, sought a way out. Somehow, he broke the bars and made his escape. But Cerberus, the 3-headed dog of Hades, was on his trail, and before Coes could even taste sunlight, he grabbed him by the legs and dragged him back into the depths of the earth. And so the Titans were finally sealed away. There is another story, which tells instead how the Titans ate Zeus's children, one of which was the god of wine, Dionysus. And this instead spurred on Zeus's rage to destroy them. The cannibalistic nature of Kronos could be an allegory and symbol of old traditions where children were eaten by tribes to worship gods. This in turn could mean that the battle of the Titanomachy is a symbol of how an old religion fell away to make way for a new one. While the Titans lived in misery down below, their sisters, the Titanesses, were in fact all spared. Rhea, Mnemosyne, and Aphrodite among them. Oceanus was also spared and left to stay at the far end of the ocean, which today we know as the Atlantic. He happily obliged. Atlas, the young Titan, was given a special punishment. Zeus appeared to have a strong dislike for him and punished him to hold up the pillars between the earth and sky, and so the split between Gaia and Uranus became final. With this final act, the Olympians took over the seat of Olympus and became the new pantheon for the people of Greece. But the role of the Titans was not entirely finished. Like his father, Zeus also attempted to create his own race of people, but both were failures of an epic sort. The Titan Prometheus, forethought, and son of Iapetus, created his own race from clay, a simple people. They lived rather short lives in comparison to the previous races, but their lives could certainly be fulfilling. He named them humans, and slowly he taught them all there was to know about building, baking, making tools, learning and crafts. Granting them both knowledge and wisdom, he gave them everything necessary to live fulfilling, abundant lives, Prometheus, like the Titan Kronos, cared for his children as best he could. However, when the people killed their first bull, they were unsure which parts to give to themselves and which to offer to the gods. Prometheus said, "Let the gods decide." And so he took the delicious meat and wrapped it up in an old raggedy ox skin, and took the bones and wrapped it in the delicious fat. Zeus was then called to make his decision. Upon seeing the delicious fat, he quickly selected it. When the bag was opened to reveal only bones, he flew into a rage and declared, "If they want the meat so badly, let them eat it raw." And with that, he took away the fire from the people. The people's vast knowledge was essentially useless without fire. They could barely craft tools, they lived cold and miserable lives in the caves and trees, barely able to etch out a living. But Prometheus would not abandon his children so quickly. So at night, he snuck into Olympus into the room of Zeus and chipped off a piece of flaming coal from the fire. Placing it in a fennel stalk, Prometheus made his way down to his children and gave them the greatest gift he ever would: fire. Soon, small lights sprinkled all over the world, like golden stars flickering to life across the vast darkness. Zeus saw this from his throne, and he immediately knew who was responsible. He ordered Prometheus to be dragged to a giant boulder to which he was chained. Zeus then summoned a giant eagle. The bird circled around and around and then swooped down, tearing into Prometheus' stomach, ripping out his intestines and eating up his liver. The Titans' howls and screams of pain were ignored by the gods. During the night, this liver grew back, and the following day the eagle returned to do so again. Oceanus would try and persuade his nephew to apologize to Zeus, but Prometheus laughed, only envied him his ability to hide in his caverns, and then sent him away. Prometheus was so punished for 1,000 years. But Zeus was not done. Angry that the people were not dependent on him as much as he wished, he decided to bring punishment upon them as well. He called for Hephaestus, the Olympian god of crafting, and ordered him to create the most beautiful woman that he could. Working hard and long, Hephaestus eventually brought forth a maiden fair and beautiful. Each goddess gave her a gift, of sweetness, of joy, of softness, of clothing and jewels, and so she was called Pandora, meaning many gifts. Zeus then gave her a small box and took her to Epimetheus, known as Afterthought, the brother to Prometheus. Before he had been tied to the boulder, he had warned Epimetheus not to accept any gifts from the gods. Remembering his brother's words, Epimetheus did as he was told and did not accept Pandora. He was now the sole protector for humanity after all. But cunning Zeus would not be so easily turned away. He told Epimetheus that Prometheus had been punished for starting an illicit affair with Athena. Surprised by his brother's deception and now doubting his intentions, he accepted the beautiful Pandora, who brought with her the small pot. Upon entering Epimetheus' home, she almost instantly opened the pot and let out a slew of horrible things upon mankind. Old age, strife, plague, misery, sickness, pain, and fear. The horrors struck her and Epimetheus both, stinging their skin before they could slam shut the pot, leaving only delusional hope at the bottom, allowing mankind to have something to hold on to. This is generally considered the final act of the Titans in the context of the Greek myths. A splattering of other stories, like Kronos being released from Tartarus to become the god of the Elysian Islands, of the blessed dead, and some interactions from Heracles were also told. But generally, Prometheus was the final grand act of the Titans. Now, from this story and myth, we can safely make the assumption that the Titans are mostly considered a stepping stone for the Olympians, to showcase the younger gods' cunning and how they felt the mighty origins of the world. The cycle is often seen in mythology, the old making way for the new. However, this is not considered a one true myth. The number of sources and literature written or studied by poets, scholars, and historians make this myth, like all myths, only a piece of a very large puzzle. For example, in some stories, Atlas might not be the father of Atlantis, Kronos could be a third child, not the youngest, and may have rather been a tyrant than a benevolent ruler to his people. In another version, the Titans never even existed, and instead the world was born from a primordial egg. It really depends on which source you're reading. This story in particular was taken from the account of Hesiod, a 5th century BC poet quite popular and highly revered. But what does this mean for the Titans? Were they truly only stepping stones? A simple hurdle for a great pantheon of gods? Maybe not. Perhaps the Titans could represent something more: evolution and foundation. Although our first thought when considering evolution is always better, that is not exactly what I mean. Better can only be considered within context. Evolving without fur would certainly not be better for an Arctic bear, but it might be for a human who has learned to make clothes and doesn't need it as much. The Olympians did not evolve to be better than the Titans, rather to fit in better with a new culture. When looking at their stories, they are not made out to be as grand as Gaia or Uranus, nor even as Kronos. They are far more human, thus far more prone to mistakes. Societies, like old religions, are continuously changing. Considering the Olympians better than the Titans would not be fair to either, as they were each important and ground within the context of their respective civilizations. Yet the Titans do seem to hold a place of reverence in the poet's eyes, despite being used as only a stepping stone in most stories. They had a golden race, a golden people. They were monarchs to a golden age. Gifts and wisdom were passed down from their primal forms, showing us symbolically that we learn from history and that it teaches us even long after it is gone. And they created the foundation: ocean, sun, justice, fire, memory, crafting, and time. All of these are concepts and physical constructs our world would not be able to function without. And although some took over the mantle in later stories, we must not forget who gave it to us in the first place. When we consider the Titans now, we can see that they held a far greater meaning than simply stepping stone. Kronos was the head of the Titans, and after all, he was the father of time. It could perhaps then be a symbol of recognition that shows us that their lessons and foundations, like the gods themselves, were and forever will be as timeless as they were.